So we will get started. So my name is Emma Dodd, support consultant here at Talis, and I'm really pleased to be joined with two colleagues today. We've got Matt East, Education Lead from Talis, and also Samantha Sharman, a student researcher from the University of Lincoln. I'll let Matt introduce a little bit more about Sam shortly. As always, we are recording this session, so you can refer back to it, and you've all already confirmed in the chat boxes that you can hear and see the slides okay, which is brilliant. And that's just to confirm that we're recording. So first of all, I'm just going to hand over to Matt, who will give you some context of the project and take it forward. Over to you,
Thank
Matt.
you very much. Hi everyone, thank you so much for making the time to come along today. So as Emma mentioned, my name is Matt, I am Education Lead here. And I thought it would just be useful to give a bit of a background on kind of how we got here today, really. So over the last year, we've been, as a business, focusing much more effort around what I'm calling education-focused discovery. So really trying to ascertain with Talis Aspire, how is the product being used? What's the kind of academic experience and the student experience looking like, to help us make more informed decisions around what's next, or what we develop next. And as many of you will be aware, we have been undertaking a project in part funding with the QAA, Quality Assurance Agency, over this last year that looked into really how are students actually engaging with digital reading as part of their studies. And Sam was actually one of the student researchers on this project. And so as we were working together and discussing what else could we do as kind of future research, we were playing around with a number of different ideas, and this was an area that we as a business felt would be really, really valuable. And the reason why, I guess, is that we were quite inspired, or I was certainly inspired by some of the work from Oxford Brookes that we've covered in our podcast, the TLCR podcast, recently, around what is a reading list for. But actually, we recognised that there was a bit of a gap in nationwide or even international research into student perspectives on good and bad of reading lists. So that's kind of why we're here today, really. And what actually enabled this to happen was a collaboration with the University of Lincoln, who have a project they run every year called the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Scheme, which has actually funded Sam's time to do this project. So really, really great collaboration there, really great partnership, really great opportunity for Sam. We're really massive thank you to the University of Lincoln for enabling, for helping this happen, really. So I want to say before we kick off that this project has been, Sam's owned this. I've guided this project, but she's done the research design, the methodology, she's run the focus group, she's done the analysis. So this is truly a student-led project. As a follow-on from this, we are publishing this as a resource that you'll be able to use, and we've just recorded a podcast which gives a kind of 20-minute summary of all of this. So if you do want to refer back, you've got a couple of options there. So with that, I am going to stop talking and hand over to Sam. Sam, can you just unmute and confirm that we can hear you?
Yep. Hello.
Awesome. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. So thank you, Matt. This slide just shows a quick overview of what I'll be discussing today. So as you can see, I'll give a rundown of the project context, the findings, and where we'll go next with the research. So our aim of the project has been to understand what students perceive as a good experience with a reading list. This involves learning what factors they view as good and bad, or what they'd prefer to see in the future, with the intention of providing libraries and faculty with this insight so that they can then incorporate it into their professional practice. Okay. So our methodology, we adopted a mixed method approach in order to gather the data. So the survey asked several quantitative and qualitative questions, with the lines of questioning just detailed down there on the slide. We held 3 focus groups in total, with the participants being asked questions similar to that asked in the survey, but with 1 or 2 more targeted questions. So, for example, the participants were asked to detail their thoughts on the length of reading lists specifically, which wasn't an area covered in the survey. We had a wide variety of students respond to our survey, which was absolutely fantastic. The focus groups had a more narrow focus as due to time constraints, we could only organise sessions with students in the UK. However, we did have students from a wide variety of disciplines, levels of study and institutions. There was also a great variety of students who'd used Talis Aspire before and those who were at institutions not using the platform, who had paper or PDF copies for reading lists. In these sessions, students were asked questions relating to reading list guidance, reading list length, their good or bad experiences with reading lists, resource types, and their approaches to using the reading lists. There you go. So these charts here relate to the final set of survey responses. So as you can see, we had a really good spread of users. However, we do believe that the online face-to-face question has been misunderstood, as the responses don't read like they are from students studying at a distance. That's just in the bottom right corner there on the slide. I'll give you a second to look at those. Yeah, so that's the distribution of the disciplines of the respondents. As also mentioned, we asked students about their learning traits and how they would rate themselves. These charts on the slide here show that generally students rate themselves as having quite good digital skills. They also apparently tend to plan more in advance. They view themselves as more independent learners rather than collaborative. And largely they like their courses, which is great. This indicates that we're dealing broadly with responses from active, engaged students, which does unfortunately mean the data from the survey and the focus groups is not necessarily representative of those students who are less engaged with their studies, which is just something to definitely keep in mind throughout this. Okay, so now on to the findings. So we've outlined 5 areas of importance, the key areas really that have emerged from the survey and focus groups. There's a lot of overlap between these areas, as will become evident shortly. So the repetition between these areas just reinforces clearly the importance of the aspects raised in the data. So we've got them all just listed on the slide there. And now, one of the key recurring themes of the responses to the survey and discussions in the focus groups was signposting. Time and time again, students mentioned how the best reading lists they'd experienced had clear indications as to which resources were essential, recommended, or further reading. Conversely, the worst reading lists they had experienced lacked these features, and it was unclear to them which resources were a priority. Students in both the survey and the focus groups reinforced these notions. Signposting was a strong area of discussion in all areas of our research. I cannot state how much it came up in all of the responses. Expanding on this, a number of students also highlighted that the specific signposting of the passages and parts of a text they should engage with would be extremely beneficial, as it saves time, but it also meant they engaged with what is deemed to be the most relevant and important parts of a text, instead of getting lost in all the pages. One specific student, an undergraduate art, design and creative studies student from the University of Lincoln, stated that it was very daunting having a list that's not remotely describing what it is about or what chapters they recommend or list their importance, and it's just a list of books. They also added that a list like that, which has no organisation or signposting, does not encourage them to try and decipher and work out what will actually be helpful. So, as that student quite concisely stated, it's more of an obstacle having a lack of signposting. Strong signposting can make or break a reading list, and in the case of longer lists with plenty of resources, it was deemed essential by a number of the focus group participants. Signposting was said to make the long list more approachable, as it was far easier to navigate. Particularly in the case of longer lists, a lack of signposting can be overwhelming, as students simply just don't know where to begin with the work and the tasks assigned. The word overwhelmed itself cropped up in multiple survey responses, often in relation to lists that weren't signposted. Finally, regarding structure, the two features that were raised by students in both the survey and the focus groups were either thematic or weekly organisation. So either grouping resources based on shared topics and themes, or by when in the course they are studied. No other clear structures were suggested by the respondents. As you can see, the quote taken from the survey, just on the screen there, demonstrates a preference for both weekly and thematic organisation. They show the value of clear tagging of the importance of readings. Okay, so closely linked with signposting is the matter of organisation. Clarity and consistency were the main takeaways from the survey and the focus groups regarding this area. One specific aspect, which was the subject of great discussion in the focus groups, was the desire for greater guidance within the organisation of the reading list. Simply signposting as essential or recommended is all well and good, but a preference for greater guidance on how to use the resources and why they are relevant or important was expressed by the students. It was proposed that such an approach would enhance engagement with the resource by highlighting the importance of the resources directly to the students. Also mentioned in the focus groups by multiple participants and discussed extensively in the survey is the preference for the clear sectioning and segmenting of resources. The ease of navigation of reading lists was an aspect frequently mentioned as a feature of a good reading list. And this was often stated as coming directly from strong, clear organisation of sections. So essentially a list that wasn't just one extremely long, monotonous list of texts and materials. Finally, as I will discuss in a second, assessment-related resources are frequently prioritised by students on reading lists. Some students mentioned how they frequently went back to these lists when specifically writing their assessments or undertaking research or revising for exams. Strong organisation of assessment materials was a preference as it helped enhance the quality of their projects. There we go. Length and usage was also an interesting topic that came up quite a lot in the data. The first thing to note is that students are frequently engaging with their reading lists, overturning any notions that students just don't read that is often held by some academics. They are frequently interacting with their lists, as shown by the high percentages detailed there on the screen, interacting weekly. Another area discussed considerably was how long a reading list should be. A clear preference amongst the students for a more concise reading list was expressed. One participant in the focus groups, a social science undergraduate student at the University of Durham, highlighted the problem of having too many resources, as they simply stated that they don't know anyone on their course who reads all the resources assigned, stating that pretty much everybody just prioritizes the materials directly related to their assessments. However, this does not mean that reading lists should just be kept to essential reading only, as students are surprisingly engaged with the recommended and further reading on their lists. Over 70% indicated in the survey responses that they engage with these resources. As a result, it is clear that there still needs to be an element of wider reading, but perhaps not to the excess some current reading lists exhibit. Furthermore, a lack of reading list resources can actually result in a lack of student engagement. Many bad reading lists were described in a negative light by respondents due to there not being enough resources. This was further...
Sam, sorry, can you turn your camera off by
if
chance?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, that's better. Thank you.
Anyway, apologies, where was I? So many bad reading lists were described in a negative light by respondents due to there not being enough resources. This was further expanded on in the focus groups, where it was raised that it felt pointless engaging with a list that has little to no content on it. Finally, many students brought up the time it takes to engage with resources as a factor, with this taking priority over the overall length of reading lists in some cases. The general impression here is that the longer it takes to engage with resources, the less preferential the reading list is. There you go. So these charts show the statistics behind the findings discussed in previous slides. This chart here demonstrates the frequency of student engagement with reading lists, and as you can see quite clearly, the frequency is high. I'll just give you a second to look over the stats on there. Okay. These charts demonstrate the resources students engage with and their methods of prioritizing resources. Of note here is that 77.9% engage with recommended reading, aka they go beyond their essential reading, while 70.4% prioritize assessment-related resources, and 56.8% actively engage with the resources that are of specific interest to them. And again, I'll give you some time to look over those stats there. Okay, moving on. So the specific content of the reading lists and the relevance of resources was yet another major theme that emerged from the data. An interesting aspect here is the student preference for a variety of resources, both in terms of types and variety of opinions expressed in them. One undergraduate social sciences student at the University of Nottingham expressed such as, in their eyes, a bad reading list has resources featuring purely Eurocentric understandings of a concept and little diversity of approach, idea, or experience. A great deal of work has been done in the past few years regarding introducing the voices of minorities into set readings, so it's interesting that students are perhaps expressing a preference for this. Regarding the variety of resource types, specific formats such as podcasts, videos, ebooks, so on and so forth, are also preferential. A great number of students also have a preference for resources directly related to assessments being included on reading lists. An overwhelming amount of students prioritize assessment resources over any other type, and many of the respondents indicated that a good reading list had resources that were clearly linked to their assessments and assignments. Furthermore, up-to-date and recent resources are key for students. Of note, this aspect was often mentioned by science and technology, engineering, or medicine students as being particularly important. An undergraduate engineering student from the University of Leeds stated in the focus group how one of his bad reading lists and one of the worst experience with a reading list he'd had was one that hadn't been updated in 10 years. Additionally, an undergraduate social sciences student at the University of Oxford said that reading lists that focus only on older foundational texts with no recent literature are deemed bad because it means the student doesn't know what recent debates or discussions of topics there are. Given the ever-changing nature of all academic fields of study, up-to-date resources are key, and this was clearly expressed by students. Regarding availability, online resources were praised significantly due to their apparent ease of access and wide availability. Many of the responses pertaining a bad reading list described how students could not easily access the resources, whether that be down to broken links or due to being a physical resource in the library. Physical resources were not widely praised in the responses, as many students complained that there was simply not enough of the materials for their cohort, and thus there was almost a fight to get books and materials out of the library. This factor was aptly summarised by an undergraduate social sciences student at the University of Durham, who stated that you can't have everyone on the course fighting over 2 copies in the library, referencing clearly when the physical resources are limited, but are still set as essential reading. This series of charts just demonstrates the data behind the factors just discussed, as it shows the responses to the ranking question that was asked regarding what resources were deemed most important to a student. The question asks students to rank the most important aspects as a 1, with unimportant resources a 7, and a descending scale of importance from 2 to 6. We've generated an average for each of the rankings, as you can see just there on the slide. As you can see, although reading directly related to seminars and lectures ranked consistently high, resources related to assessments and resources for wider reading were also ranked quite high, showing students view these as valuable resources to include on reading lists. Here we're also seeing a preference for resources that are directly related to seminar or lecture activities, as well as a preference and like of resources that are directly related to assessments. Moving on. Similar to the last chart, this one here just shows student preferences regarding reading list resources and their formats. Clearly, students are expressing a preference for materials that are easy to access, as well as an indication of the importance of variety when it comes to resources, with this being variety in both content and resource type. There we go. As you can see on the slide there, we've generated the averages once more. Okay, moving on. So a few final things emerged from the data which need to be considered. Firstly, a shockingly low amount of students received any developed form of guidance on reading lists. Many, like the quote present on the screen, were simply told they had a reading list and that it existed, and then were promptly left to their own devices. Some were not even made aware of their reading lists at all. The importance of guidance is highlighted by an undergraduate social sciences student at Birmingham City who stated, "Sometimes they just give out the list and never refer back to it later in the year," with this being a reason for them to skip the reading or a factor in them not doing the work. They also said, "If I didn't get asked if I read the stuff in the list next week, then I don't bother." It needs to be noted that there was an absence of comments praising the features of Talis Aspire reading lists. When reviewing the question related to what's missing in Talis Aspire, a large portion of responses mentioned functionality that's already available, just showing wider need for greater instruction on reading lists, especially on reading list platforms. Finally, students do want reading lists, which sounds obvious to say, but it needs to be reiterated. An alarming amount stated that they had not had a proper reading list at all, or that some modules do not have them. The sentiment among these students is that they really would prefer a proper, well-thought-out reading list. One of the focus group participants, an undergraduate social science student at Sheffield Hallam University, stated that a proper, organised reading list would be much preferred to their current situation of having the lecturer just suggest readings at the end of a lecture, as it meant they would be able to refer back to their readings easier, which would be extremely beneficial for them when it came to assessments. There you go. So to concisely summarise the findings, we've come to some recommendations for future reading lists. So, starting off, they should be introduced to students on every module at the start of term. Consistently referring to the reading list throughout a module is also recommended. Good structure is absolutely critical, as is the tagging of resources based on priority. As you've seen, this was by far the most common piece of feedback throughout the project. Additionally, resources should have extra guidance on how to utilise them so students are more confident in approaching the materials. This should include very focused guidance, such as the page ranges or guidance on things to consider when engaging with a resource. Having sections related to assessments are welcomed. Students reported a significant increase in reading list usage during assessment time, yet finding assessment-related resources was difficult. There should be something that is specifically sectioned out, and providing links to specific guidance, such as providing examples of previous submissions or the assessment brief, is ideal. The length and duration of a reading list ought to be considered carefully, with academics reviewing resources regularly so that they are up to date. Students didn't necessarily mind a long reading list so long as it was well structured with clear guidance. Furthermore, a variety of perspectives and opinions should be included in the resources on reading lists. This is particularly important to help students develop their critical thinking and appraisal skills. Academics need to be more aware and considerate of the workload of students and be realistic with the amount of resources set and the time taken to engage with them. This particularly arose in the focus groups where students cited feeling anxious due to the expected volume of reading every week being unrealistic in their view. Finally, and this aspect comes largely from the animated discussions of the focus groups, academics should carefully consider the usage of their own works on reading lists and whether it is appropriate or not. Multiple students in the focus groups said they were generally distrustful of when academics include their own resources, so this is definitely a point to keep in mind, as that distrust meant they did not engage with the texts. There we go. So there's some recommendations for Talis as well. Firstly, giving students more guidance on how to use the platform properly would be fantastic. It seems that the inconsistent use of lists is problematic. Perhaps creating some sort of mechanism that can be used to help guide academics towards good practice would be good. The relevance of assessments arose a lot, but the way that the resources are tagged by academics is more transactional. If there was any way to expand the tags for academics to apply more student-focused, learning-based recommendations, that would be great. I'm not too sure what Talis offers now around academic guidance, but some of the challenges here would be around academic training, perhaps more focus around good practice that's driven by student feedback could be considered. Finally, where students reference their reading intentions, they couldn't seem to do anything with this. Being able to categorize resources you have or plan to use is valuable, particularly when it comes to citations and bibliographic activity on modules. But this isn't possible at the moment, and it would be very beneficial for students. There we go. So does anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Sam. I'll just give a few minutes for people to add questions. Oh, I'll put my camera on as well. I found that really interesting, and thank you for giving our community the opportunity to go through and hear the fantastic research that you've done. Okay, we have got our first one. Angela's asked, what do you deem to be the optimal size of a reading list? And what do you think is the optimal ratio of essential, recommended or further? Obviously those terms can change institution to institution as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's hard to kind of pin down a specific magical number for this. There was a great variety suggested by all the students. I think generally either one or two pieces of essential reading, one or two pieces of recommended reading, and then as many pieces of further reading that might be deemed relevant to the topic would be good, but not an excessive amount of essential reading seems to be the gist.
Sam, can I just add to that
Yeah.
as well? Firstly, awesome, really great to see the findings that you've presented today, really clear as well. So this question comes up a lot, and we've heard it a lot, and I think building on what Sam's just said, there isn't really kind of a magic number, but the key thing that came out from the analysis that where we both did this was, in some ways, the size of the reading list doesn't actually really matter. It was actually just down to the signposting that exists. So, if lists are annotated, if they're organised properly, and students have got the guidance, then actually you can have a 500 item reading list. But as long as students are given that opportunity to filter and to target what they're using, they've got the choice. I've probably put some words in your mouth there, Sam, but is that basically what you found?
Yeah, that's pretty spot on, especially in the focus groups when the subjects of longer reader lists came up. It was pretty much reinforced that longer reader lists are fine so long as they're approachable with guidance and signposting and organisation.
So whilst we've got other people typing, I think one of the things that that really jumped out to me from this was, and I think we can probably delve into this a little bit deeper, but the impact that the impact that a disorganized or badly structured reading list can have on the kind of wider module engagement, I found astonishing. So for greater context, there were a couple of comments from students who were saying effectively they just disengaged with the whole module if they found that they had a reading list that had no structure, no guidance, nothing. And I actually found it, you would have to correct me on the wording here, Sam, but it was effectively anxiety inducing. Having a really, really negative sort of connotation on the broader academic experience. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you found from your analysis in that area?
Yeah, so essentially time and time again, students would often say they would be overwhelmed or made anxious by these really long, unapproachable reading lists. And that seems to be sort of the trigger point for them not engaging with the module and then not engaging with wider studies as well. So it's the reading list seems to be, if it's an obstacle, it has a really negative impact on the rest of their studies.
I think that feeling of that word of overwhelming is a very, very powerful one, and something we've absolutely got to recognise. So I can see a number of comments around other resources and other how can we use this to I guess support what you've all been saying when you're working with academics. So just to kind of reiterate, and I'll come back to further questions in a moment. We have got a bunch of outputs that we're planning for this. So Sam and I recorded a podcast this morning, so keep an eye out for that. That really is designed to try and be sort of 20 minutes short, sharp overview of what we found. You're in the webinar right now, so congratulations. We are looking to publish this. So Sam and I are currently just writing all the findings up. In fact, Sam's written it. I'm just reviewing it, which is even better. So keep an eye out for a publication in that regard. And I think there's some really good points here around sort of infographics and that type of thing. So we'll absolutely be taking that on board. So thank you for the suggestions. I can now see loads more questions coming in. So Sam, did you get any feedback on having reading lists directly in the VLE? Let's just stop there. I didn't think so.
No, not really. Sorry.
Really interesting students say they're told about resources at the beginning of term and not encouraged to access the list during term. We often see in the stats that engagement goes through the roof in October and then slowly dwindles down as term goes on. I'm going to answer something related to that, Sam, because there were comments that were made by students. We did actually ask students from memory about how often do you access these resources, and as you say, start term assessment, but that correlates with the fact that students' preference to sort of resource priority is things that relate to assessments as well. So I'm not particularly surprised there. That also adds a lot of value, I think, to why the use of thematic reading lists might be potentially more valuable than weekly, particularly if you're tackling a new subject every week or a new topic every week. So we've now seemed to have started a conversation about who's got the biggest reading list. So I look forward to seeing the conclusion of that. But
there was sorry, Sam. There was Matt. There was an earlier question about from Simon. Was there any preferences for resources that were available more online? Did that sort of come up as a theme? That was just an earlier one.
Definitely. I would say there's definitely the preference for online accessible materials. Just the whole physical resources in the library often being limited. A lot of students found online resources a lot more convenient. I think having worked on the active online reading project as well, there seems to be a preference for online resources coming through because there's a plethora of benefits of being able to access it from home, not having to go into campus, so on and so forth. So, but in terms of reading lists, it's easier for them to access, and thus they're often more engaged when it's online.
Okay. I hope that answers your question, Simon.
There was a quote that came up from one of the students who described the fight for the one textbook in the library. I think that was it anyway. But I thought that was quite a good summation, really, of why is it so much more valuable to be digital rather than physical in some cases. There's another question around were students asked if they went beyond their reading list at all.
There wasn't a specific question, but a lot of students in the survey responses in particular mentioned how they would use the reading lists and then based on what was on there would use that to inspire their further research. So there's definitely an impact of the reading list on wider reading beyond what's assigned as well.
I think that's actually a further research opportunity. To be honest, you know, beyond reading this feels like something I should probably write down actually. And Hazel, well, you were. You know, the work you've done at Oxford Brookes was a massive influence for this work. So I'm glad that you're seeing the encouragement there. So thank you very much for that comment. Okay, so I can see a few more comments. Oh, there's another one coming up. Did any students comment on the level of bookmarking of ebooks? For example, the entire book versus the individual chapter?
In the focus groups, I know once or twice it came up that some students preferred quite detailed commenting on the level of bookmarking. So some of them even wanted like the specific paragraphs they wanted to read or should read detail to them. They were, I think, engineering and built environment students and science and technology students. And from what I could gather, they had quite hefty textbooks. But in general, you know, individual chapters, keynoting those were definitely preferred to just having a book.
So we've got a follow-up question from Matt about the quality of metadata. So when an academic bookmarks a journal, for example, there might be fields that are missing that you would typically use in a citation. Did anything like that come up?
Not off the top of my head, no. I don't think.
I don't remember anything.
I just wanted to pick up on something for those of you that may have been at Talis Insight Workshops. You've heard this in the session that I ran with my colleague Zena. You've mentioned in one of your later slides, Sam, about recommendations, and onboarding was a key part of that. That actually quite a lot of the features that students were asking for were in the system, but actually if there were things within the system that would help their tutors and their academics, you know, make more annotations and add more structure, that would be really beneficial for the students. So we are again driven by this research, and this has been super helpful. We're looking at an onboarding project where we can tap into some in-application help. We know a lot of you do a lot of your own resources for academics in teaching them and supporting them and using the reading list, but actually we're looking at using a tool while they're on a particular page, you know, sort of pop-ups and prompting where notes are and where structure is, to really add that value to increase the quality of the list, to support everything that Sam's found in the research. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that point, which was covered in that workshop if you were there.
So I think that is it by the looks of it from questions. There is a point here that Amjad has made around, we'd also be interested to know if we should be bookmarking print and electronic on a reading list, or bookmarking multiple editions to make resources more accessible. I think that's something that we will need to pick up, you know, internally. I don't think Sam can answer that question.
Yeah, we can take that offline, Amjad. Sure. Yeah, we can pick up on that one.
Great. Right, well then, thank you ever so much for attending. Sam, again, a massive thank you to you for all the work you've done here. You will get a copy of this webinar, and we will certainly be in touch about follow-up resources. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good rest of your day. Take care.
Take care. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sam.